They say the water up north is the clearest in Michigan. Torch Lake, deep as a secret, sparkles like glass beneath a midday sun. The old cottages, tucked into rows of pine and birch, breathe quiet memories into the morning mist. But stillness doesn't always mean peace. Up here, the wind knows how to scream. The trees can crack, like bones in the night, and every so often something is found in the woods that no one wants to talk about. There's a reason some of the cabins stay empty all year. A reason some locals won't walk the trails after dark. People smile at the tourists, but their eyes dart just a little too fast when asked about the history of a house or that one property just past the ridge, the one no one seems to own. Nature's quiet can be a comfort or a cover. Krista didn't know any of this when she arrived. She just needed a break. Time alone, someplace peaceful. She hadn't meant to stay so long. Originally, it was just going to be a long weekend. A few quiet days at the family cottage. No emails, no co-workers, no noise. But after the layoff, the plan shifted. Time didn't feel real anymore. Her severance package bought her a few months, and suddenly the idea of clearing her head stretched out like the lake before her. Deep, wide, unknowable. Torch Lake had always been the backdrop of childhood summers. Ice cream melting too fast, bonfires that smoked out your clothes, the weird feeling of fish brushing your legs when you swam out too far. It had been magic then. And now, returning in the pale hush of early fall, it felt suspended, like something had exhaled and not yet inhaled again. Most of the neighbors had packed up and left. The gas station up the road switched to winter hours. Even the gulls seemed quieter. Krista didn't mind the solitude, at least not at first. She cooked simple meals, watched the sun vanish into the trees each evening, and tried not to check her phone for anything resembling job leads or social updates. Her mind felt foggy, like it was trying to remember something it hadn't learned yet. On the third day, she took a drive into town just to wander. Main Street was barely 2 blocks long, quaint, almost performative in its charm. An old-fashioned barber pole, a bakery that doubled as a bait shop, a post office that also sold novelty mugs. She passed them all absently until something caught her attention. A narrow building she didn't remember. Wedged between the antique bookstore and the hardware shop, it had warped siding the color of dried lavender and hand-painted letters on the window. Thistledown treasures, vintage, curious, rare. The sign swung gently in the breeze, creaking like an old hinge. Krista paused on the sidewalk. She didn't know why. Something about it felt magnetic. The display window was cluttered with dusty lace, old dolls, and glinting trinkets, but one object seemed to shimmer in the corner of her eye. Not bright exactly, just persistent. She stepped inside. The little brass bell above the door gave a tired chime. Inside, the shop was darker than it looked from the street. The scent of aged paper and dried roses hung thick in the air. It wasn't laid out like a modern resale store, more like a museum curated by a slightly mad grandmother. Narrow aisles, high wooden shelves, and a dozen ticking clocks, all out of sync. "Hello?" Krista called out, but no one answered. She wandered slowly, her fingers brushing carved picture frames and beaded purses, tea sets, and snow globes. Every item looked like it had a story it wasn't quite ready to tell. And then she saw it. Nestled in a velvet-lined tray near the back of the shop, a small ornate object that gleamed softly in the low light. Porcelain, maybe. Or opal. She couldn't tell. It was shaped like a heart, but not in the cartoonish sense. More anatomical, with delicate veins etched in gold leaf, curling around its surface like ivy. The moment her fingertips touched it, warmth flooded up her arm. Not heat, something richer, comforting, nostalgic, like remembering a dream from childhood that you were sure you had invented. In her mind's eye, for just a breath, she saw a house. Not just any house. A beautiful home tucked deep in the woods, sunlit and still. She could smell pine, hear laughter, feel belonging. Krista blinked and the vision vanished. She looked down at the keepsake in her hand. Somehow she already knew she was going to buy it. The old woman who finally emerged from behind the curtain near the register said very little. She wrapped the heart-shaped trinket carefully in tissue paper, layer after layer, as if it were something fragile and sacred. Krista asked how much it cost. The woman simply named a price, less than she expected, and gave no receipt. No explanation, no story. Just a paper bag with waxy handles and a strange weight that felt heavier than the object should be. Outside, the sky had shifted. Wisps of cloud drifted low over the lake, and the sun had turned a hazy gold. Krista tucked the bag into the passenger seat and glanced at it once before driving off. The thought crossed her mind that it almost felt like she was taking something home. Something important, like a piece of herself she didn't know was missing. The next morning, Krista woke, smiling. She couldn't remember the dream exactly, just color and laughter and warmth. A woman's voice, humming a tune she didn't recognize, but felt like she'd always known. Her sleep had been deep and dream-rich, the first in months where she didn't wake with a racing heart or check her phone in the dark. The keepsake sat on her nightstand, catching slants of early light. It looked almost different now, like it had been polished overnight. Krista picked it up and turned it in her hands, expecting cold porcelain, but instead found it warm, like skin that had been resting in sun. Later, while sipping coffee on the back porch, she held it again. And again the sense came rushing back. That house in the woods, a breeze in the curtains, a dog barking somewhere beyond a fence. She could hear music playing softly from a radio, an old waltz, the joy of a summer afternoon spent in a place she'd never been, but felt like home. It was strange, yes, but not frightening. Over the next several days, Krista found herself craving the feeling the keepsake gave her. When the silence of the lake got too thick, when the stillness felt like it might smother her, she would take the trinket in hand and just listen, feel. And the visions came clearer, a hand brushing flour from a countertop, a fire crackling in a stone hearth, laughter echoing down a hall with family portraits she couldn't quite see, the sense of another life just out of reach, but not foreign, familiar. She began leaving the keepsake out during the day, propped gently on a folded cloth-like display. It became a kind of anchor, an unspoken companion in the quiet cottage. She started sleeping better, eating better, even humming sometimes the tune from her dreams. Her mornings were filled with light. Her evenings felt like memory rather than longing. For the first time since losing her job, Krista felt okay. More than okay. She felt whole. But sometimes, just sometimes, she noticed things, shadows that didn't quite match the light, a reflection in the lake that lingered longer than it should. Nothing alarming, nothing clear, just a ripple beneath the surface. It started with an argument. Krista had fallen asleep on the couch, the keepsake resting in her hand like a worry stone. The dream began as they always did. Warm sunlight on polished floors, the distant smell of bread rising, and a woman's voice humming an old tune through the hallways. But this time, the tune broke. It faltered, mid-note, and the air seemed to tense. In the vision, Krista stood in the middle of a living room, rich wood paneling, brass lamp glowing on a side table, watching two figures argue in hushed, frantic tones. A man and a woman. Their faces were turned away, voices sharp with panic. She caught only fragments. "You promised. They'll find out. I can't do this anymore." Then the dream dissolved like smoke, and she woke, with her heart racing. The cottage was dark, the hearth fire cold. Her coffee had long gone bitter in the mug beside her, but in her palm, the keepsake was still warm. She told herself it was nothing, a memory spliced together from some show, some news story. Dreams were strange like that. But the next night, she saw the man again. The dreams, once beautiful, began shifting like film reels spliced out of order. Familiar rooms turned colder. The woman, once joyful, radiant, now seemed tired, her smile strained. The man's face was still unclear, always turned away, but Krista could feel his presence more strongly now. He moved through the visions with heavy steps, his energy taut and coiled. Sometimes she sensed him watching her, even when she wasn't in the room with him. Krista began waking up at odd hours, always sweating, always with a strange, heavy sensation in her chest, like someone had been sitting there. The keepsake would be glowing faintly on the nightstand. Once, she found it in her bed, curled into the blankets at her feet, like a pet that had moved on its own. On the fifth night, the dream was no longer a dream. It was a nightmare. She stood at the top of a staircase inside the same wooded house, but something was wrong. The walls wept moisture. The floorboards pulsed beneath her feet. She could hear the woman crying, no longer in frustration, but in fear. Real fear. Krista moved through the rooms, calling out, but no sound came from her mouth. The wallpaper peeled away in long strips. The light bulbs flickered red. A shape moved down the hall, fast, jagged, wrong. She turned into the den, where the fire burned too hot, too loud. And there, on the floor, she saw herself, eyes wide, body twisted. A blood trail like ivy across the carpet, and beside her, just inches from her lifeless hand, was the heart-shaped keepsake. Krista jolted awake, gasping. The room was ice-cold. Her hands were trembling. The object still sat on the nightstand, inert now, no glow. She reached for it, then stopped. For the first time since she bought it, she didn't want to touch it. She went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face. In the mirror, she looked pale, hollow-eyed, like she hadn't slept in days. Maybe she hadn't. When she returned to bed, she left the keepsake on the floor. She told herself she'd put it away tomorrow, but she didn't. Krista avoided the keepsake for 2 full days. She left it untouched on a bookshelf, tucked behind a stack of travel guides and a ceramic owl she'd found in a drawer. She told herself she needed a reset. Better sleep. Clearer thoughts. She took long walks along the lake and filled her hours with small tasks, organizing the pantry, chopping wood, repainting the chipped banister on the front porch. But the silence pressed in. The cottage no longer felt like a refuge. The air inside had grown stale, heavy. Sometimes the lights flickered, just for a second. Sometimes her reflection in the mirror lagged, as if it didn't quite want to keep up. And at night, though she tried to sleep without it, her dreams came anyway. Broken now, scattered, shadows without shapes, crying without source. She woke one morning with the keepsake in her hand. She didn't remember picking it up, didn't remember getting out of bed. It was warm again. That day, something shifted. The visions came as soon as her fingers curled around the trinket, no longer needing the veil of sleep. She was standing in a hallway, sunlight through amber-colored curtains, wallpaper with delicate roses. A mirror above a hall table reflected something just out of frame. She heard footsteps down the hall, the man's voice calm but cold, the woman's voice pleading. Then a door closed. Krista tried to follow, but her body wouldn't move. She stood frozen, watching as the wallpaper began to peel, as shadows crept from the corners like spilled ink. She saw a flash, a wooden sign above the door, hand-carved, Harrow's Edge, and below it, hanging on a small plaque, 2824 Granite Hollow Lane. Krista staggered out of the vision, breathless, heart a-hammering. She grabbed her phone and searched the address. Her fingers trembled as the map loaded. It was real. A property less than 40 minutes away, nestled between county roads, surrounded by dense woods. It existed. Krista sat in stunned silence for a long time. 1,000 thoughts collided in her head, none sticking. Had she seen the house somewhere before? Was this all her mind, piecing together the impossible from some memory she didn't know she had? Or was something, someone, showing it to her? She didn't know what had happened in the visions. She still hadn't seen the man's face, not clearly. The woman was always just a few steps ahead. And the keepsake, it wasn't giving her answers, just fragments. But it wanted her to see something. And now she knew where to look. That night, she placed the keepsake on her chest before sleeping. No resistance this time. She was ready. The dream came quickly. She stood at the base of the stairs again, the air crackling with tension. The house was darker now, but alive, breathing. She climbed slowly, each step groaning beneath her. At the top, she turned left, past the bedroom with the lilac curtains, past the sewing room with the broken lamp, toward the den. The fire was already lit. The woman was there, standing still, her back to Krista. She was holding something, another heart-shaped keepsake, a pear. Krista opened her mouth to speak. Then she heard it. Behind her, footsteps, slow, deliberate. She turned to see the man, but again his face was swallowed in shadow. Only this time he turned slightly, just enough. And for a split second, Krista saw his eyes. Cold, flat, familiar in a way that made her stomach twist. She woke up, screaming. The next morning, she packed a bag, and she drove to 2824 Granite Hollow Lane. The driveway was nearly hidden, 2 rusted posts swallowed by underbrush and half collapsed into the earth. Krista slowed as her car's tires crunched over loose gravel. The trees pressed close, arching above like ribs. Somewhere in the distance a crow called once, then fell silent. When the house came into view, her breath caught. It was exactly as she'd seen it in the visions. 2 stories. Dark wood siding faded to silver gray. A wraparound porch hugged the front like folded arms. The wind stirred a single rocking chair that creaked once, then stilled. For a moment, she thought she saw movement in the upstairs window, but when she blinked, it was gone. She parked and walked up to the door, the keepsake tucked in her coat pocket like a charm. When she knocked, the sound echoed too long. Footsteps shuffled inside. The door opened a few inches, and a man stared out at her. He was in his late 50s, maybe older, broad-shouldered, with sun-leathered skin and eyes like river stones. He looked at her, then down at what she held. His face changed. "That's my wife's," he said, almost a whisper. "Where did you get that?" Krista hesitated. "A thrift store in town. I was told it came from an estate sale. I felt drawn to it." He opened the door wider. "I sold some of her things years ago," he said slowly. "Didn't think any of them would end up back here." There was a silence that dragged too long between them. "I was hoping," Krista said, choosing her words carefully. "You might have others like it. I've never seen anything so beautiful." He studied her face. "Come in," he said. "Maybe. I'll take a look." The house smelled like wood smoke and old flowers, the same scent from the dreams. Krista followed him through the foyer, past the narrow staircase with the worn banister. Her hand brushed it as she passed, instinctively tracing the same 3 nicks near the bottom, like she'd known they were there. She blinked. The wallpaper, the same rose pattern, the same hall mirror. Everything was real. He led her into the den, gesturing toward a high shelf. "She used to keep them there," he said. "Little things like that." Krista stepped forward and, without thinking, reached up to the shelf, her hand stopping just shy of a small porcelain figure. Not the same, but almost. She turned it over gently in her hands. "You should open the curtains," she said softly, her eyes drifting to the window. "The sunlight at this hour hits the little treasures and dances on the ceiling so beautifully." The man froze. His expression shifted from polite weariness to something far more alert. Suspicion, confusion, and a flicker of fear. He turned toward her slowly. "What did you say?" Krista blinked, suddenly self-conscious. I don't know, I felt like I'd seen it, like I'd been here before." The room was quiet for a beat too long. "You've never been here before," he said, voice tight. "You said the store told you my name. They tell you anything else?" Krista faltered. "Number, I just wanted to know more about her, about where she lived. She seems, I don't know, familiar to me." "Familiar," he echoed, not like a question, like a warning. There was something cold beneath his tone now, like an old blade being unsheathed. Krista could feel it in the room, the way the fire in the hearth crackled too loudly, the way the floor seemed to tilt just slightly toward the center of the house. "Her name was Miriam," he said finally. "She passed a few years back. Sudden. Heart issue. That's what they said anyway." He turned toward a cabinet and opened it. "She kept a few others in here, I think. Haven't looked in years." Krista stepped forward slowly, drawn to the shelf where she'd found the first object. Her fingers brushed another. The moment she touched it, the room vanished. She was inside the vision again. Miriam stood in the center of the den, clutching one of the keepsakes to her chest. Her eyes were wide, terrified. The man stood before her, shaking, red-faced, something in his hand. Krista couldn't move. could only watch as the woman stumbled backward, mouth open in a silent scream, just as the man lunged forward. And then she was back in her own body, back in the den, gasping. The keepsake fell from her hands and cracked against the wood floor. She looked at the man. "You," she choked, "you killed her." His face went pale. "What did you say?" "I saw it," she whispered, backing up. "In this room, you." She was afraid. She was terrified. The man stared at her, his jaw clenched. A muscle twitched in his cheek. "That's enough," he snapped. The politeness had shattered. His breath hitched. The room seemed to hold still around them. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing," he growled, voice low and full of restrained violence. "But you need to leave, right now, before something happens to you, too." He took a step forward. Krista backed away instinctively, her hand brushing the mantel for balance. Her fingertips grazed something round, a ceramic figurine, and the moment she touched it, she was somewhere else. The vision crashed over her like a wave. She was standing in the kitchen, Miriam's hands trembling as she opened a drawer. The same drawer Krista had walked past earlier on her tour through the house. Inside, knives, lined up like soldiers. Miriam's breath came quick and ragged. She turned her head, eyes full of tears. Then, back in reality, the man had lunged for her, knocking the figurine to the floor. Krista stumbled backward and bolted from the den, his footsteps pounding after hers. She hit the hallway, tried the front door. It wouldn't budge. Locked. "Krista," the man shouted behind her. "You don't know what you're talking about." She ran deeper into the house, through the hall with the rose wallpaper, past the stairs, through a narrow door that led, she hoped, to another exit. It didn't. She found herself in a small room, dusty, cluttered, shelves full of old cookie tins, sewing boxes, jars of buttons and broken china, a dead end. Panic rose in her throat. She turned, searching for anything to defend herself. Her eyes landed on a chipped cookie jar shaped like a beehive. She grabbed it, cold, heavy, her fingers clenched around it, and again the vision came. The drawer, left side of the kitchen, third from the stove. That's where the knives are. A jolt of adrenaline surged through her. She spun as the man burst through the doorway. "You need to calm down," he shouted, wild-eyed. "You're scaring yourself." Krista raised the cookie jar as he rushed her. She threw it with both hands, crack, right into his head. He reeled back, roaring in pain, and she darted past him, heart hammering in her ears. Through the hallway, into the kitchen. She dove for the drawer, third from the stove, and yanked it open. Knives. She grabbed the biggest one, turned, and he was already there. Blood trickled from his forehead, his eyes filled with hate. "You stupid girl," he spat. "You don't know what you're doing." He lunged and ran right into the blade. The impact drove Krista back into the counter. The man gasped, eyes wide. For a second, neither moved. Then he slumped forward, his weight heavy on the knife, blood blooming across his shirt. He dropped to the floor, twitching once, then lay still. The silence was suffocating. Krista stood there, frozen, the knife still in her hand, shaking. A soft light flickered at the edge of her vision. She turned. In the kitchen doorway stood Miriam, not as she was in the final dreams, not afraid, not broken. She was whole. radiant. Her eyes glistened with something between sorrow and peace. She nodded once, slowly, and gave a faint, grateful smile. Then she was gone. Krista didn't remember getting back to the car. One moment she was staring at the blood cooling on the kitchen tile, her breath jagged and hollow. The next, she was gripping the steering wheel, hands streaked with dirt and something darker. The keepsake pulsed in her coat pocket, soft and steady, like a heartbeat. She didn't look back at the house as she pulled away. The trees swallowed it behind her. The drive was a blur. At some point, she noticed the sky had turned a bruised shade of blue, dusk folding over the hills like a closing eye. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling, even as the miles peeled away between her and Granite Hollow Lane. At the cottage, everything was too still. The wind had stopped. The lake was a sheet of glass. Even the birds were silent. Krista sat on the porch steps for a long time. Long enough for the shadows to shift and the crickets to find their voice again. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. There was nothing left in her for that. Inside she washed her hands slowly, her movements careful, as if any sudden motion might shatter the strange calm that had settled over her. Then she opened the drawer beside her bed. She placed the keepsake inside, shut it gently, and turned off the light.